from this, I think there's a reason why you have to work.
Sorry, I forgot to record. Thank you. We got that on a sticky note. I'm sorry, I forgot to push record at the beginning, but we captured that on a sticky note.
And Marnie, can I just remind people that you can add notes too, so we can look at them, and if I'm not capturing them correctly or accurately, please feel free to add your own as well. You have access to this.
We want to hear all the voices here. And also you can use the chat, please. And I'll copy directly out of the chat if you'd like to use that to share.
I'll chime in. So my name is Andrea. I'm a parent of a Whitman student. And I'll just echo what was said about listening to neighborhoods. So I think like it's a weird tension that I feel like I sit in these gatherings, knowing like our school is one of the ones that's viewed as a problem to be fixed in terms of under enrollment. I'm not saying that's not something that needs to be addressed, but I think it feels like I would be curious, like what families, specifically in the neighborhood I'm in, right, at Whitman and Woodmere, what do they think about the impacts of new students coming in, or how will that impact? What do our families at those schools want for our students? And yeah, that's just an angle that I don't feel like necessarily gets considered.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maya Mori. I'm a representative for Mount Tabor JDLI, and I would second, I guess I have a unique perspective in the sense that all of my kids have gone through, I have 4 kids in the JDLI that have gone through Richmond. So I've seen what a positive model the whole school DLI is, but I also remember when my older kids were at Richmond, there was so much, there was a lot of negativity from the neighborhood about losing that school. And so I remember that even though my kids have flourished in the program and it has been a great benefit to them, that was one of my first concerns, is how many neighborhoods are going to be feeling that anxiety and pressure. So I think it is a big concern hearing the voices of the neighborhoods.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Martha, I didn't see your hand raised.
It's all good. No
It's in your
worries.
beautiful art right there.
It's from my home country. I added in the chat a document. Yesterday we held listening sessions, both in Spanish and English, and translation vice versa. From the English was mostly attended by neighborhood parents, and the Spanish was mostly attended by DLI parents, since most of the Latinx communities in DLI program. I attached the notes so you all can see what the neighborhood is thinking, and also what the DLI parents are thinking. As well, within this notes, it is specifically to point out that in our school, we have an inclusive skills classroom in which we have students that are SPED. And we have parents that those kids have students that are SPED that have access to the neighborhood classes and have access to the DLI classes. And we have not heard much from those SPED parents. So yeah, I think if anything, the voices that we're missing is students or special programs that are within all schools that do not fit within the neighborhood or DLI model.
Thank you. You got some snaps there, Martha. So I think we just have a couple of seconds left, Alyssa.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add other than I feel like I haven't heard much from the Lane community. And I'm really happy that Andrea Emerson is in our room tonight, because Whitman and Woodmere, I haven't heard much from either. And I would like to say I like all the people in the room, but I feel like I've been in the same room with Beth from Creston, Martha from Atkinson. I can't see everybody right now. It's been nice to kind of get to know people, but I appreciate the like mixing, like Maya. I don't know if you've been coming, the person from, I'm sorry, I can't see everybody. So Micah, yes. So anyways, I like the mixing because it's giving me more parent perspectives.
Great. That's great feedback. Thank you. We just have a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds, that 16 seconds. Anyone want to close us out? Who haven't we heard?
This is Tanya at Mount Tabor. I'm the principal. I heard from parents that were concerned that they have kids in both DLI and NAEP.
Okay, so I will share my screen. And I cannot minimize my screen when I'm recording, it tells me. Okay, so I'm going to share Miro, and you're also very welcome to come in here with me. It is a lot. Is there anywhere someone would particularly like to start? We talked about having Jenny having some input from the data to tell us where to start. The schools were the most impacted.
Marty, I have a general question about proposal 3 that keeps getting mentioned. So I know that I believe it's next week. There are a series of community meetings that are supposed to be happening to discuss the proposals. And one of the, I would say, massive missteps for phase 1 is that they PPS discussed the proposals with the community and then changed the proposal in the end, and then the one that was submitted was never reviewed with the community. So, and we haven't seen, proposal 3. So when is that going to come out, and how is that going to be communicated with the folks that you are talking to next week?
We're going to talk about proposal 3 tonight together,
okay.
And come up with ideas. Judy, do you want to speak to the community engagement?
We're also looking at shifting major elements of that community engagement for the very reason that you mentioned, Beth. Like, we at least want the committee to have seen all the options, begun to review them before we're broadly interacting and listening with the community. So we're trying to figure out the best way to manage the timeline and what can move. But also, like in working with Shanice Clark, who's here with us tonight, just if we can take advantage of any of the BIPOC sessions as just another way to have general conversation with families, not necessarily even just focused on these 2 plans, but some of the very questions you all are asking about what would it feel like to have other kids in your school. So look for more information about how those community engagement events will be shifting so that they better align with all of the options. And then totally hear you, Beth, about the need to, once an option seems like it's solidifying, that like reality check with broader community before passing it off.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I'll just share, Beth, we're learning about some of these changes in the same time space that you all are. So we're going to help and be as proactive as we can, but it takes time. As you know, these things are complicated. So appreciate some patience and grace and flexibility there. So it's a little challenging seeing your screen, Marnie, but I have other aspects. I think.
Would you rather share?
No, I think it'd be good to stay on yours for note taking just right now, but I'm wondering, because we've been talking about the shifts and the program changes, if we want to center on the racial equity impacts. I heard that coming up in the larger discussion, and just focus on that for beginning discussion, if that makes sense to everyone. I don't want to lead the way the discussion wants to go. But do people understand where these metrics come from and what they mean? Getting thumbs ups.
While you're thinking through that, a technical question for Marnie. I thought I could help take notes so that Jenny can focus on the mapping. Is there a small group to Miro sticky place?
I just thought we would put them on the maps as we go school to school, or if we're talking about this, let's put the stickies around it so we know what we're talking about. I'll bring in some sticky notes. Great.
I can do that.
Where are they going? Where are they going?
Is there a question, Micah?
Yeah. In the Discord discussion, there have been questions on the capacity numbers that Flow have generated, and then responses from I think their parents of those schools saying, you know, an example would be, oh, this school has a capacity of 600 something, and you know, the information, or at least from experience, parents' experience of, you know, the you know, building is exploding at 500 capacity of 500. So I think there needs to be some clarification of where those numbers come from, and at least on the parent side, I know, you know, certain schools have certain classrooms that can be classrooms but are dedicated to sensory whatever, right? So I think there needs to be some clarification, especially if it's to the percentage utilization numbers on that.
Certainly. Yeah, so those numbers we worked with PPS, and they were provided to us, and they reflect the school's capacity without modulars, thinking about the school space without the additional modular spaces. So I don't know if Judy, you want to expand on that, because it was something that was we were handed.
Yeah, so really quickly, because I know these are short sessions, but we value the parent experience, and we look at, like, if we set aside rooms that we would never put a whole group of students in all day for all those reasons, with the classrooms that are left, we expect that they would have 25 to 27 students in them. In some settings, if your class sizes happen to be smaller, you're going to need more classrooms, even though you have fewer students. So we can definitely, we're pulling up the data for some of the key schools that people have asked about. Bridger, Arleta, Woodstock so far is what I know. We'll keep trying to do that. Sorry, and that's, I just noticed the word luxurious in the chat because I hadn't looked down until just then. So that's an interesting adjective for this moment.
It's
Because
luxurious.
Marnie
that
had said we have until 8:03, so I was like, that's luxurious, the luxurious amount of time.
So much time.
And I just want to acknowledge, you know, when we define impacted students, that's not one necessarily commonly held understanding of what impacted is. And so we can look at the racial equity impact. We can look at the number of affected students between the two proposals, which is in the dashboard broken down by neighborhood versus DLI program. I don't want to define what impacted is for folks in the room. So would like to hear your thoughts on that and what you would like more clarification on.
So if it were in your power to change something in this proposal, what do you think it would be? How could you make it better?
I don't know how I would make it better because it seems difficult to shuffle all the pieces if you're trying to think of how to make it better for everybody. So I am going to be selfish and just say what I would like to see in Woodstock would be that we didn't get split up into as many different schools, that there was somehow a way to keep the neighborhood kids recognizing they need to split into schools, maybe not 3 different elementary schools, but 2, and relatively evenly. So it didn't feel like a small segment went away, which I would argue is maybe important to everyone who might be experiencing boundary changes, that it's not a small sliver of people shifted away, but that groups of kids would at least have some community that they were moving with. I don't know how to do that though.
I think Alyssa is talking about proposal B for Woodstock.
Oh, we're talking about proposal A right now.
This proposal A, right? You're right.
So that would be CSS at Woodstock, which then means the neighborhood boundary dissolves and students go to a number of other schools. But
Right.
it wouldn't be the entire.
Yep, that's right. My mistake. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
there would be a certain number of neighborhood students that could also be enrolled in CSS as well as the focus option. Correct, Judy?
Yes, and because time is short and people think maybe more holistically, like Woodstock sees its neighborhood change from its current structure in both of these. And I totally hear you, Alyssa. And just so you know, like when we're thinking about planning implementation, one of my first thoughts is there a way for the whole cohort to start the change together? Even if the boundary changes phase in over time, is there a way to preserve a cohort at one of the receiving schools? I'm not trying to say that's the only solution. I just wanted you to know that as planners of implementation, we do care about trying to keep communities that are already intact together if possible. And we're open to your ideas if you see something that might make it better.
Yeah, I don't mean to dominate, because I think what I'm trying to express is important for all the schools, to feel like if we're going to be shifting around, that the kids are left with a sense of the community, especially after the trauma of last year for children. And yeah, I never had even thought that might be a possibility of phasing it in, but yes, it's even nice to hear that maybe there are some ideas like that that could be explored.
Jonathan?
My kids go to Glencoe, and fortunately in all of this, Glencoe is one of the schools that's relatively unaffected. There is a section in the northeast boundary that will move to Vestal depending on the proposal, and then a section in the south that is currently not going to Glencoe that will change. I think the challenge here, I actually think that both plans have good value. I think Plan A, when you look at the equity numbers and the enrollment numbers, it balances out things really well, right? 100% of students are at schools, both middle and elementary, that meet those goals, and most students are at schools that aren't overutilized. So, and that's the case with both proposals. I think the challenge here, of course, is that those decisions are made in large part mathematically and statistically, and there aren't any emotions in either of those, right? But there are emotions here. And I guess just to piggyback on the last comment, that I can imagine like having I have 2 third graders, and they are friends with the kids that they're going to school now with, so moving the district boundaries or the school boundaries for them to say start 4th grade and then not have the kids that they've been friends with now for a couple of years will be challenging. So if there's a way to try to implement these changes maybe more slowly over time, I think there could be a lot of value in that, like at a certain grade level, either like 3rd grade, you'll finish at this school, and then 2nd graders start, because they haven't been with the same kids quite as long. But, I guess the one thing I've left in the chat in the main group is that I think we can all agree that not everyone isn't going to be happy, right, with whatever decision is being made. And I think, and again, it's easy for me to say because nothing is changing for me, but in this phase, but looking at things from a more holistic standpoint, not how is this affecting me, but how will these changes affect things moving forward, I think maybe is an important perspective to have. Again, like doesn't mean much from a person who's not having any changes. Less maybe means less.
Beth, you have your hand up.
I mentioned this a little bit on Saturday, but I just wanted to reiterate that as we change the boundary lines, it would be great if we can avoid having our small children cross major streets. So I noticed that on some of the, like, obviously I'm Creston parent, so I looked at the Creston map, but on one, like Woodstock's boundary changes from edge of Holgate to a smaller street and those kids go to Creston, more than welcome to come to Creston, but why are they crossing Holgate? Like that's the thing. So if we can minimize when we change things, if we can minimize those crosses for major streets holistically, that would be really helpful. And maybe even take the opportunity to fix some of the issues that we have right now. We have kids in Grout crossing 39th, Cesar Chavez, and we have kids in Creston crossing it the other direction. So it's like, can we change the boundaries to some of those major streets so we protect our children? Because some of these are really dangerous roads to cross.
I think in general, I hope that we leave enough time in this process to take a really close look at exactly, I mean, this is why this timeline strikes me as borderline crazy, right? Because like, I think there's these big picture things we need to discuss. And also, yeah, like each one of these boundaries, just in sort of talking to folks from different communities I'm not as familiar with, there's boundary lines on here that seem to make sense to me geographically, but then they're pointing out like, things exactly like what you said, Beth, which is like, yeah, like there's not like this is okay in theory, but there's not a crosswalk here, right? Or like I was talking to someone, I live in South Tabor, and I think the proposal here draws a line at Woodward, I believe, for like north-south current bridger attendance boundary, and it strikes me as geographically weird in terms of the neighborhood, but someone was telling me the history of this, is I didn't even know that it kind of dates, there's some really questionable history of where that line came from in terms of sort of segregating what at the time, 20, 30 years ago was like the Vietnamese immigrant community back when Kellogg was originally open. It's like, do we really want to just use that as a default given the history there? So I think it's going to take a lot of time to unpack some of this stuff. But I would say, but last thing I'd say, and I know and people are tired of hearing me say this, like, I just want to note, I think we can name things we like and don't like about these individual proposals, but when it comes time to comparing the two of them, so much hinges on having a better understanding of like, I don't know what a better location for some of these DLI programs is if the district can't provide a more coherent point of view on how we should be weighing that, right? And all of the small details are going to flow from that. So I'm going to keep pushing that point, and I'm sure we'll come back to it in the next conversation, but I think it's a good point about the map.
Thanks, Andy. I saw your hand, Micah, but let's see, is there someone else we haven't heard from?
I just don't really know where to start tonight. I mean, there's so much to address, but I mean, I guess I'll just say, coming out of meetings with the Harrison Park community this week, that I'm like echoing. Does anybody else hear that? I don't know.
A little bit, but you're okay. We can hear you.
Okay. I mean, I can tell you all there's definitely a lot of gratitude for that we were listened to about having a neighborhood elementary school. So really appreciate that for safety, like we're talking about, and reasonable boundaries for young kids. I mean, I did have questions about like, well, when they say there are like, these are like this is a non-negotiable point. So is that for real? Is this do we really get to have a neighborhood elementary school? And I said, well, we were told very firmly that these are non-negotiable. And now I'm left wondering, okay, some of the non-negotiables apparently were negotiable, but I guess maybe not this one. So I hope I've given my school community accurate information and telling them that is decided. And yeah, I also, like Andy, really hope we'll have time to go through some of the boundary details. I just feel like we have like these breakout groups that are so brief. It's really challenging. So I feel like, we just need to see like this proposal 3 as soon as possible. We need to start getting into the details. That's where I'm at right now.
We have about 13 more minutes in here. We could look at proposal B to just, oh, look at that. It's coming back to me a little bit. We could look at that a little bit and see what your reactions to it are, which will help inform that C. because that's what we're going to do later in our next breakout, is going to brainstorm what you would like C to look like. Shall we do that? Should we look at B now in the last 10 minutes? Wow, I suddenly just got a burst of bandwidth somehow. And see your reactions to this that maybe you've had a chance to think about since Saturday. And then kind of put them both in your mind and think, what would you like? And then when we come back into the next breakout room, we can brainstorm that.
Well, if I can add another quick comment, I mean, like in response to Andy's concern about Bridger and proposal A, I mean, totally agree with that. And I'm not sure why Bridger has been like considered this like the prime option to just be totally transformed with this whole process. I mean, yeah, but it's yeah, of course, Harrison Park, you know, the Harrison Park DLI community is really concerned about essentially no longer having access to that program because our families, I mean, it's like, even if there's busing, you know, it's very far. And I think we know that more Harrison Park families will rely on busing than Woodstock families, because a lot of our families don't have cars and rely on public transit and district transit. So I think from an equity perspective, you know, that like B eliminates access to that program for Chinese families in the neighborhood, and that's unfortunate. But A also like eliminates, you know, the entire school at Bridger, and that is really unfortunate. So I wish we could find other options.
Which goes back to the need for a clear justification of what we're trying to do with DLI generally for the millionth time. But yeah, I appreciate that, Marissa.
How about someone else? Can we hear someone else's reactions to B? Maybe kind of in thinking about what you can absorb from A. I see you, Alyssa. Let's hear from someone else who we haven't
That's
heard
fine.
from.
Yeah, if nobody, I'll
First. Yeah, I'll come back to you. In the kind of, I know it's, like I said, a little fire hose drinking, but if you kind of take on as much as you can of what A feels like and take on as much of what B feels like, what are your reactions?
Marnie, can I offer another, is just like, when you've looked at B, like what makes you curious? Are there elements that you're curious about that haven't come up yet that maybe deserve to be surfaced? Just so that we're not missing something that there are a lot of big issues. We hear that, but we don't want to miss things. So any curiosities that you see in B?
I know one of the curiosities that came up from my building at Mount Tabor from families was about what the long-term plan is, as Tabor is the only middle school, I believe, in the draft B proposal that falls below that 500 student enrollment. Concern about the programs that were there in regard to how long it would be until those were reinstated, if the district would be providing support to ensure that that continues to be a robust, comprehensive middle school as it has been in the past. So there was a lot of questions in our community about that and why those decisions were made.
I can actually give you a 30-second on that one. It's not what we preferred, but knowing that you're a school adjacent to the Northeast zone, the next place we'll have to go with district-wide enrollment balancing and program review, and that we have adjacent K-8 neighborhood schools that we will be having to consider for conversion. That was one of the reasons why we thought, and we understand the uncertainty and absolutely the potential for program impact. So the sequencing is really important.
Please also.
Go ahead, Marnie.
I was just going to say, please feel free to use the chat. Go ahead.
One of the things that was asked to look at as a difference between A and B in terms of DLI locations was maintaining programs near or at places where they currently exist, or in trying to locate programs closer to native speakers. So I'll just put that out there as like one of the primary difference between them. If there's any input on that, because that's a difference between the two.
I know I've already talked. I'll be brief, and if somebody else has something to say, please. What I'm hearing at Woodstock from non-native speaking families is that if DLI was at Bridger, they would likely not enroll their children, and they would choose to send them closer to home. I don't know how unique that is to DLI programs in general. I would think it's probably not that unique in some instances, but I guess we're making a lot of assumptions that when we move this together, that that it's going to remain the same as what it is as far as demand goes right now.
I'd love to hear what you think, Martha. Where are you? I can't find your art. Oh, there you are, your face. I'd love to hear what you think. You're muted. I didn't mute you.
Appreciate y'all saying that, but I'm trying to follow guidelines as I've been asked by PPS administrators through phone calls this weekend to not speak. So just to let you know. Just look at that data from the parents at our school. That's all I have to say.
Was it your school admin or your district, or who told you not to speak? Just out of curiosity, or are you not able to share?
District. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. And as a facilitator of this room, I'm interested in all of the voices, and I'd love to hear what you think about these. We have captured from all of the meetings, and also now it's time to do something different. So your voice is very important. And we're also going to talk about a third option, and I think we need to hear from you. To your comfort, of course. I see your hand, Andy. How about anyone else? What are your thoughts? And then I'll come back to you. Is there someone who hasn't spoken that you're just sitting there with this puzzle in your head that you would like more clarity on, that you could ask, and we'll get it out there? And then all of what's in your heart and in your head is going to influence the next step. So I would love to hear it. And also please use the chat if that makes you more comfortable. Okay, I'm gonna go to Andy. And I see you, Michael, will get you next. And you're muted, Andy.
But I'll try something that's not something I've repeated 10 times tonight. Well, actually, it's related, because I would have loved to see, I wish I could have seen in one of these a version where Lent's, I know this has Lent as a neighborhood DLI, but it's still like, and Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the traditional neighborhood program still goes elsewhere in this. And I've anecdotally, at least I've heard from Lent that there's a lot of folks in that neighborhood that feel really strongly about maintaining the traditional neighborhood program. And I hope as we go through the process and listen to them, that maybe there's a way we can consider an option that maintains that. And then my more general reaction to B was, I actually thought this one did a slightly better job sort of mirroring, I know there's exceptions with specific boundaries, but sort of mirroring the geography of neighborhoods a little bit better. Like that, like A feels to me like just one level too much, almost like a gerrymandered map, like with Atkinson going to Hosford. It just feels, and maybe the trade-off is that's what got us to 100% on the metrics, right? But my sense was that even though it's not the main concern, it made a little more geographic sense to me, but I'm sure others might have a different perspective.
Thank you. Micah.
A little, I guess, out of the box thinking in terms of maybe this may not meet the guardrail that we've been issued is since it seems like CSS is presenting a lot of roadblocks here. And, you know, this may be kicking the can a little bit further down. Just how important is CSS, right? That's one question, for it to be a program or not a program. Or can it be split up into a K5 and a K8 and put them in facilities that can accommodate for the time being until we figure out what to do with it in the future? And if we don't, and if CS is not part of this, part of the proposal, then what would happen to the proposals, right? Then we don't have to figure out where to fit CSS. Just a thought.
Thank you. I think we're going to be pulled here in just a few seconds. Anyone else want to share before we go?
I just want to share quickly, like whenever anyone suggests like this is going too fast, let's hold off another year, the pandemic and everything. I just want to remind everyone that Harrison Park is the only school in the Southeast, not a non-focus option, that's left as a K-8. And last year the board decided to overcrowd Kellogg because they said it was so important to get every kid in a middle school. So now, like to Harrison Park, it feels like, well, our kids don't need a middle school. How are they getting an equitable education?
Welcome back. So this time we have, this time we have about 25 minutes together. And I will share my screen, and please please let us know your ideas. What would you like to see drive this third option? And go big. Go what are your dreams of driving this decision? And then evaluate later. Let's just brainstorm right now. What would you like to see?
Hi.
Hi, Sarah.
Okay, a big one. I would like, since we have two scenarios that keep CSS intact, I'd like to see a third scenario that keeps neighborhood K5s intact.
Thank you.
Sarah, can you say any more about that so that this note is going to resonate more with folks who read it? Keep neighborhood K5s intact, meaning no boundary changes?
No, I mean, I recognize we have to change boundaries. I'm speaking specifically about moving CSS as a K8 into an existing neighborhood school. I'd like to see a scenario that doesn't do that and see what other options might come up for CSS, because it seems to me like there's some wiggle room that we're not looking at. And I cannot fully buy into the rationales we've been given so far for keeping CSS a K8 and taking over a neighborhood school in terms of our lens and everything. So that's my big dream for the third one. Is that enough?
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Micah.
Big lens is and I believe in a regarding to enrollment, increasing enrollment, I mean, what it comes down to would be funding, right? And if it's not, if we could look at this, not we're going to fund the school per how many students it has, and find a different way of funding schools. I mean, wouldn't that help in terms of the equitability issue, right? Because I believe that's part of why we're doing this whole thing to start off with, is to increase enrollment in some of these unenrolled schools, because they're not getting the funding because they don't have the head count.
So you're saying explore funding that wouldn't require as many changes to, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. Like explore a funding mechanism that wouldn't require as many changes because you'd still have the resources even with less enrollment.
Right, and it's one of those, if you build it, they will come, type of egg or whatever, right? If funding is for whatever reason, however percentage funding is preventing a school from being a good school, right? Because we know when we go, when we went to buy a house, we look at, hey, how are the schools, right? And if the funding, I'm no expert in this. If the funding is there, what's the relation to it eventually getting into a better school regardless of headcount? I don't know.
So, so you're saying not linking funding to enrollment?
At least not so much, from my understanding of funding, right? And I don't know a whole lot about how funding works in PPS or in school districts in general, but it seems like headcount is the main factor in that.
So a school that didn't have the high enrollment has less money, then starts to fail. So if a school had as much money as it needed and was pulling people to it versus the less people, the less money, the less people, the less money. So if it was a great school, people might move there to go there because it was a great school.
So if I could just say, like, we do have a significant amount of equity-based funding that goes into schools, even very tiny schools, to try and achieve that. The second thing is, like, I don't think flow analytics can fix that problem, but I do appreciate that these, like, enrollment is a small piece of the whole. It just helps create the conditions. Funding helps create the conditions. There's a link between the two of them. I'm not intending to lose your point. And I don't want to, Jenny Axelrod from Flow here is in the room thinking like, well, how can we model a funding neutral?
Model infinite funding, Jenny.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because Maker, we've worked with Corvallis School District, and they pool all of their property taxes and share equitably across all their schools. So I don't know if that's a model that's being used in PPS, but to Judy's point, and just a little, asterisk in the corner, what Karina said is that, we're here to help, like, look at the options that people provide, but just want to make sure that, like, don't give us too much credit for, like, driving the development of these. Like, we take our guidance from, the district and the SEGC. So thinking about things that, what single strand versus multi-strand, is single strand, for a neighborhood program or DLI, positive or negative to you, or what do you think about that? Because those are things that, we can have, we can look at differences at, or what locations may suit CSS, or what would be an idea for co-locating, Chinese DLI, or maintaining it in Woodstock. Like, those types of things are things that, we can look at. And to your point earlier, Andy, all those things kind of need to be set before we can even look at boundaries. So, we're looking at whole school models, and in however long it's going to take to get this next one. And I appreciate you acknowledging the time factor, Andy, because we're starting again. Looking at these other types of considerations based on the input that you all are sharing.
I said go big, Micah. I appreciate that you did.
Yeah.
That was big. Props. Now we're getting to
Yeah.
let's do like let's do like reinventing public education.
So
I see Maya and
I
Marissa.
see,
both.
yeah, Maya, Marissa, and Alyssa. We'll go in that order.
sorry. So coming from, my kids all went through Richmond. I have a child at Richmond, which is a whole school DLI model and always has been since I started 18 years ago. What is the feedback in this room, at least, about a whole school DLI? Because this information has just come out. Last week, it was a non-negotiable. This week, it is somehow, I think, being said it's no longer a non-negotiable. So I'm just trying to get, I don't even know. I'm often quiet in these rooms because I'm in a program that is not really affected by boundary changes or program changes, programs moving. But I have empathy because I've had kids at Richmond and I know how stressful that was for the neighborhood. So what do people in the room feel about that?
Let's respond to that first.
So when we look at DLI models across successful DLI models, the majority of them sit within a whole school setting. When we look at the co-location models as it's done here at PPS, what is found in information and in data is that the co-location for the English scholars, which often are our Black and BIPOC students, does not work for them because often they are in settings with larger class size, and over a period of years of data at PPS, it shows that they do not perform. And operationally, as has been, addressed in this setting in many sessions, is that when it comes to the management of a co-located school, that there are missed opportunities for teacher collaboration and shared development. There is, not a cohesive school culture around one program that could allow a school to drive deeper. And, so again, when you look at successful DLI programs across the country or across other settings, successful DLI is mostly done and practiced in a whole school fashion. And PPS is one of the few places that co-locate a DLI program with a neighborhood school program, and it does not result in high achievement equitably across both programs.
And I would, sorry, my kids are making like party noises in the background. That's gonna be great for the video. But I think in that vein, I would love to, so I certainly at Bridge, my kids are in the Bridger neighborhood program. I certainly, some of the things that have been shared about, especially how in unbalanced, so it's an unbalanced co-location, 2 DLI strands, 1 neighborhood strand. Some of the things that have been shared about sort of the ways that tends to hurt the neighborhood strand. I definitely have, that tracks for me in terms of my own experience. But I think in that vein, I'd love to see in this scenario, at minimum, let's try to model one that doesn't have any single strand, at least no single strand neighborhood programs, right? Maybe single strands entirely. And I think what I'm curious about is, what's the difference between what it would take to achieve that? Because that's going to probably imply some level of whole school as a solution, just because there's only so many places to go. Like, but like, let's at least find out, like, what's the difference between going all the way on the whole school DLI model and something that at least eliminates the most sort of problematic, unbalanced co-locations based on what we've heard. And with that said, I still want to hear from PPS about what they think is actually best for kids on this one, right? Because we are not the experts here. I think it was really clear from phase one that we shouldn't be the deciders on the DLI model in the end. It should be based on an assessment of, based on community feedback, based on academic experts at PPS, sort of what's best. So we can look at another model, but to what someone else said earlier, I think this needs to still be the district's decision. I don't think it should be kicked back to us.
Maya, how do you feel about those answers? Do you?
Yeah, I feel fine about the answers. I mean, as I've said, I've experienced as a parent the whole school DLI model, and it has worked for me personally and my children. But that's why I was curious. I more wanted to open up discussion of other parents that are looking at these proposals, are looking at changing their situation and how they feel. Like I haven't even had enough time to really get feedback from other communities regarding, do we want to move to a whole school DLI model? Do we not? Why?
I don't know if this helps folks or not, but I was wondering, like, if we had, dreaming big, right? Like if we could just start over tomorrow, like we don't have existing programs, it's time to do them, let's do them right. Would that make a difference in how we're thinking about where these programs would be? Because we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from where we are, with families and communities who are invested in where they are, with evidence of who might benefit and who might be burdened where they are. But we're also trying to envision a future state that's better for students, families, and communities in some way. So is there a way to tease out between like what we want to achieve in the future and then how we want to get there? Like it matters how we get there. But from that perspective, do any of these, is there something that you'd like to see and see that gives you another sense of how to get, like somewhere else you want to get to that you haven't seen yet, or that we haven't noted yet?
Was I next with my hand up? After
Marissa and then Alyssa.
Yeah. So my big, if, dream, like what we could ask for anything, would be to expand the DLI offerings and not reduce them. I mean, there's so much demand for this kind of education, and we should normalize that as, that type of education. And I think co-located programs, I mean, I can speak to my experience at Harrison Park. I think it works really well for in our community, because it's really, it makes it more accessible to have the option to switch if it's not a good fit for a student, and to still have the option of of being assigned to a neighborhood school. Like if kids, have learning challenges, I think it's important to be able to have the option to move back and forth. I think a balanced co-located program is great. Like, Andy was saying, there's challenges to, staying with the same kids throughout school and not, not having the option to move, and then having, imbalanced class sizes. But, I mean, I would hope that we could say that like one model works for one neighborhood and another model works for another neighborhood. And but I think if we can dream about expanding DLI and not reducing it, that would be ideal, because clearly we know there's, you know, how many people on the wait list for Spanish DLI programs in the district. And
Thank you, Alyssa. Thanks for being patient. I appreciate it.
Sure. No, thank you. Yeah, these are great ideas that are being brought forth. I think if I could pick, I like all the things that have already been mentioned. So if I had to get another big picture thing in there, I'd like to see what would happen if we involved more schools in the Southeast. And I hate to disrupt more lives, but I have kind of, I have a hard time seeing the equity in any school or program that you lottery into. And it's by pure numbers and chance that you are able to enter into that program. And so I guess I kind of wonder what does the equity look like if there aren't lottery programs and we have good neighborhood schools. And that doesn't mean necessarily get rid of DLI, but I guess I think there's a whole large community here of people who are not in a focus option, who are not in DLI. And what does that look like if you just shift boundaries based on population and equity, I guess,
Thank you. Beth, I see your hand.
I actually just put my note in there. I agree with Marissa. I was going to say, can we actually just put a single strand of DLI and a single strand of neighborhood in every single school and create a little bit more balance where they can support each other? We can have a similar support system and structure for the schools. I realize every school is going to be a little different, but if we have opportunities in every school, then it really becomes about drawing the lines because you're too far away from your school, not about which program you want to go to.
I'm gonna make sure I'm trying to copy what's in the chat as well to make sure we have that. And I believe you were responding to this note. Oh, that's interesting.
But if we did that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna just say, how about someone else? If they did that, what?
Well, if we did that, I guess then I'd really want to know if we're essentially doubling down on the co-located model, even if it's balanced. If we think there's some, if we heard just last week that there's such, the district might feel there's such big inherent issues with co-locations that it was a non-negotiable as recently as last week that we move away from them entirely. I think that's back to the district to tell us, wait a second, ultimately, is this good? Do we believe this is the right thing for kids? Again, I don't think that's our call ultimately. So I think it's an interesting idea, but I would want to know from an instructional perspective, is that a model we want to expand versus move away from?
How about someone we haven't heard from in any of the breakouts? What do you think about this? What if you could dream of the future of Southeast Portland? What do you think that driver would be? One of the tricks is you woke up in the morning, stepped out of your bed, you put your feet on the ground and you looked around and it was perfect. What did it take to get you to that? You look around, what does it look like? And how'd you get there? Everyone would be super excited to go to their neighborhood school, even without special programs. How about someone who hasn't shared? So the driver could be that the neighborhood schools stay intact, the neighborhood schools are improved, versus the special programs are kept intact or considered. What are some other drivers? Hi, Joe. I see you just turned your camera on. Do you have something to share? You're muted.
Sorry, no, I'm just listening to everyone processing.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate you putting the notes on there. You just turned your video on too, Martha.
So can I offer a counter? So I'm going to say, like, we've heard, we absolutely have heard, and I know you probably feel like you need to keep telling us because we haven't been as responsive as you've asked for, but you don't want to see certain things stay the same for creative science. Is there anything in this scenario C that you want to make sure we avoid? And I don't mean to frame things in the negative, but you know, Marnie's perfect world sounded okay. But if you woke up in the morning, or if you're looking around now and seeing things that aren't addressed yet, again, like what would you like us to take a crack at? I think we need to carry over, you know, Beth's comment from before that I mentioned to the larger group. Like, can you try and avoid crossing major roadways, right? Can you keep whole groups intact if possible? Keep communities together. We're hearing those as like really big drivers. But surely there may be more.
Can I ask, I apologize that I had to leave this room to answer a question in the other room. And I noticed the sticky that says majority of successful DLI models across nation are whole school, which is absolutely accurate. Did we capture that in the PPS, which is a unique model that I've never seen before, that in the PPS co-located model with English scholars, Black and BIPOC children consistently over a trend of years have not been performing well? Oh, got it. Perfect. I didn't see it well. I take out my contacts at, at night. So that's probably why I didn't see it. Thank you so much.
They're also tiny.
Can I ask you for clarification? Do you mean that in Black and BIPOC students in the neighborhood strands in those schools, or do you mean the Black and BIPOC students who are in the English scholars in the DLI program?
Black and BIPOC students who are not in any DLI program housed in the same school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel I've heard a lot, I hear a lot in this whole process about like the native speakers of a language in the DLI program versus the white students in the program. But I just, like, at our school in Harrison Park, that's not how it is. Like in our DLI classes, there are like the non-native Chinese speakers are quite diverse. So it's not like.
So yeah, let me be clear. It's not really about white or non-white. It really is about DLI, the students who are sitting in a DLI program compared to the students who are not sitting in a DLI program. And in many cases, in some cases, and it represents the Black and BIPOC population.
That's really helpful. I hadn't heard that particular, that was a strong finding, and that's something I think that's really important to consider, especially as we're weighing, like, you know, communities making an argument that actually co-location works well here. Seems like we have to be really careful to ask, well, who is it working for versus who is it not? We might be hearing from some people that it's working, but who are we not hearing from that may not be working for?
Absolutely.
I think what varies within that, I'm going to talk because fellow scholar, just looking at your bio, Dr. Cheryl Proctor.
Only a few seconds, hurry.
Yeah, you're new in PPS. And I think what we're not looking is at the history of Portland public schools and how that affects knowing that we're in the whitest city in the US. Okay. And for us, as an immigrant, Latina, brown woman, DLI is not just about language acquisition, and it's being taught just as an asset that students gain. For us, is culture maintenance. For us is understanding of one another. And the problem that we have in our ISC is in our Atkinson is that we have ISC students, SPED students that are Spanish speaking only dominant in their families. And they have access to the DLI program as well as access to the neighborhood programs. Okay, that's not something that's found in many schools. Okay, and I think what we're forgetting is we're forgetting those SPED students who are both in Spanish speaking dominant families and English only speaking dominant families. And at Atkinson, they have access to both, which is not found in many places. So I just want to bring a light to those SPED students. I want to bring a light to the forms of brown parents that have been screaming very loudly, and I heard it last night, of what they want, and they feel very unheard. I know that my voice is not valued of myself any longer, and PPS doesn't want me to speak as much, blah, 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 right? But I want to make sure that we're listening to that data that I have proven, and that you know that I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for what the community wants, okay? This has never been a fight of what we individuals want, but that fight and an understanding of what our community wants. And if we're just speaking for ourselves based on numbers without the stories, if we're relying just fully on quantitative data, we're not listening to the lived experience of individuals.
We have to also ensure that when we look at the data, we see the people who the data represents. And when we see data that says 2% of our Black children in PPS is proficient, then there has to be a way of looking deeper to understand, like you say, the story behind the data, the causality behind the data, the people who are most impacted negatively by the data. And as a professional educator, that is our responsibility.
I hear you, professional educator here as well, training specifically in anti-racist practices at the college level for educators in the K-12 system.
We have just about 13 seconds left. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really, I know this is a heavy lift, and it's beautiful to hear your voices. With 2 more seconds.